Human Velocity X, Frequency 5 Soft Strength, Episode 26, How to Move Without Hardening. Welcome back, Reasonauts. Hey guys, my name isn't important. The message is, every day is awesome. We just have to get through it. And before we begin, if these conversations have been meaningful to you, subscribe and stay with us each week. Share this episode with someone who may need it. And join us on Facebook. Not for noise, not for attention. Just a place where people learning to grow do not have to do it alone. Last week, we talked about the responsibility of seeing clearly, the difference between ownership and stewardship, about caring without carrying everyone, about realizing that awareness is not permission to control another person's life. It is an invitation to become more responsible for your own. But eventually, awareness creates another challenge. Not because your awareness disappears, not because your values change, because life happens. People disappoint you, promises break, trust gets damaged. The same patterns return, sometimes even after you saw them coming. And after enough of those moments, something inside you quietly begins asking, why should I keep trying? Not because you stopped caring, because caring has become heavy. Today, we're talking about how to move without hardening, because there is a difference between becoming wiser and becoming closed. There is a difference between discernment and suspicion, between protecting your heart and slowly building walls around it. Most people don't wake up one morning and decide to become cynical. No one plans to become harder. Very few people set out believing they will one day stop trusting. Stop hoping. Stop expecting the best in people. It doesn't happen that way. Hardening is usually quiet, small, almost reasonable. It arrives one experience at a time, one disappointment, one betrayal, one conversation where honesty was ignored, one apology that never came, one promise that quietly dissolved, one relationship that slowly taught you it was safer not to expect much. One room where kindness was mistaken for weakness. One season where giving your best didn't seem to matter. None of those moments define you. None of them by themselves have the power to decide who you become. But if they remain unexamined, they begin building something. Not around you, inside you. Not walls other people can see. Walls you slowly begin calling wisdom. Little by little, your expectations shrink. Your patience shortens. Your trust becomes guarded. Your generosity becomes calculated. Your curiosity becomes suspicion. Your openness becomes caution. Not because you wanted that, because disappointment slowly convinced you it was safer. Safer to expect less. Safer not to become attached. Safer not to believe people could grow. Safer to stay guarded than risk being hurt again. That is how hardening begins. Not with anger, with protection. Protection that quietly expands until it no longer remembers what it was trying to protect. It whispers, don't get your hopes up. Don't invest too much. People never change. Why bother? You've seen this before. You already know how this ends. Those thoughts can feel wise. Sometimes they even sound experienced because they are built from real moments, real disappointments, real losses, real pain. But experience is not the same thing as truth. Experience teaches us what has happened. Truth asks whether that experience deserves to become the rule for everything that follows. Because if every disappointment becomes a prediction, every betrayal becomes an expectation, and every failure becomes your definition of humanity, then protection has quietly become your prison. And the hardest part is that it rarely announces itself. It simply begins calling itself realism, when in reality, it may only be an unhealed wound, trying to make sure it is never touched again. Pain has something to teach. Ignoring it isn't wisdom. Pretending everything is fine isn't maturity. Pushing it down doesn't make it disappear. It simply waits for another moment to speak. Pain deserves to be heard. It deserves to be acknowledged, to be understood, to be given its proper place. But it was never meant to write the rest of your story. Awareness helps you recognize patterns. It asks, what happened here? What can I learn? How can I move more responsibly next time? Fear asks different questions. It will always happen again. It is only a matter of time. Don't risk it. Don't hope. Don't trust. Awareness expands your freedom, because once you recognize a pattern, you gain another choice. Fear slowly reduces your freedom, because it begins removing choices before life ever presents them. Think about that. If every painful experience teaches you never to trust again, then the people who hurt you are still shaping your future. Not because they're present, because they've become your lens. Now every stranger looks suspicious. Every disagreement feels threatening. Every delay looks like rejection. Every kindness feels temporary. The original wound has ended, but its influence keeps moving through you. Pain was never meant to become your identity. It was meant to become your teacher. A good teacher shows you what happened, what mattered, what needs healing, what needs a different movement. Then it lets you continue growing. It does not ask you to remain in the classroom forever. The purpose of pain is not to make your world smaller. It is to make your understanding deeper, to help you recognize what is healthy, what is harmful, what deserves another chance, and what requires a boundary. That is how pain becomes wisdom, not because it disappears, because it no longer has permission to author every chapter that follows. Your experiences may shape you. They do not have to imprison you, because something else quietly begins to happen when disappointment stays with us for too long. Sometimes, time to stop responding to every demand as though it were an emergency. You don't need to become tougher. You need sleep. You need quiet. You need time. Time to let your nervous system remember what safety feels like. Time to breathe without immediately preparing for the next disappointment. There is a difference between protecting your heart and exhausting it. There is a difference between taking a step back and giving up. One creates space to recover. The other creates surrender. Those are not the same movement. Sometimes we mistake fatigue for truth. Everything feels darker when we're depleted. Everything feels heavier when we've been carrying too much for too long. Every conversation feels harder. Every decision feels larger. Every disappointment seems to confirm what exhaustion has already been whispering. When the body is worn down, the mind often begins believing that tomorrow will look exactly like today. But exhaustion is not wisdom. It is a condition, and conditions change. Everything feels impossible when we're carrying more than we were meant to carry. Remember what we discovered last week. You are responsible for your movement, not every outcome. You are responsible for your integrity, not every person's decision. You are responsible for speaking honestly, not for forcing understanding. If you've been trying to carry outcomes that were never yours, of course you're tired. If you've been carrying every room, every conflict, every disappointment, every person's future, as though it depended entirely on you, of course your heart feels heavy. Maybe your heart doesn't need another wall. Maybe it simply needs a place to recover, a place where nothing needs to be solved for a little while, where silence isn't loneliness, where rest isn't guilt, where your value isn't measured by productivity. Recovery is not weakness. It is part of responsible movement. Even the strongest muscles grow during rest. They are challenged through effort, but they become stronger through recovery. The same is true for character. Growth does not happen only in motion. Sometimes it happens while you are quiet enough to finally hear what your life has been trying to tell you. Don't confuse a season of recovery with becoming someone who no longer cares. Those are not the same thing. Caring does not require constant striving. Love does not require constant exhaustion. Strength does not require constant tension. Sometimes the strongest movement is becoming still long enough to remember who you were before disappointment started speaking louder than hope, before fatigue became your philosophy, before protection became your personality. And when you remember, you don't return to who you used to be. You do not become the same person who trusted blindly or carried everything or ignored every warning. You move forward with wisdom instead of weight, with discernment instead of suspicion, with boundaries instead of walls, with hope that has been tested, not hope that has been abandoned. That is not starting over. That is recovery becoming strength. And strength that has learned how to rest rarely needs to harden. One of the greatest misunderstandings about compassion is believing it requires agreement. It doesn't. Compassion does not ask you to pretend that harm is harmless. It does not require you to call destruction love. It does not ask you to abandon your discernment just to avoid another person's discomfort. Compassion begins by seeing the whole person, not only the behavior, not only the wound, the whole person. You can understand why someone became angry without approving what they did. You can recognize that someone is hurting without accepting the harm they create. You can understand the survival strategy without allowing it to become your responsibility. You can love someone and still say, no, I will not participate in this. No, I will not help this pattern continue. No, I will not allow this movement to pass through me. Those words can come from love. Compassion without boundaries becomes surrender. It slowly teaches that caring means accepting whatever another person chooses to do. Eventually, love disappears and only permission remains. Boundaries without compassion become isolation. Every person becomes a threat. Every mistake becomes disqualification. Every disagreement becomes distance. Eventually, protection becomes loneliness. Soft strength holds both, a living heart and a clear boundary, an open hand and a steady spine. The willingness to understand without surrendering what is true. Sometimes the kindest thing you can offer someone is honesty. Not because honesty always feels good, because honesty creates the possibility of reality being seen. Sometimes the most loving answer is distance. Not to punish, not to prove a point, not to make someone suffer, but because remaining would continue a pattern that needs to end. Sometimes respecting another person's freedom means allowing them to experience the consequences of their own choices. Not every consequence is something to rescue. Some consequences become the very teacher a person has been avoiding. That isn't punishment. That isn't revenge. That is dignity. Because every person deserves the opportunity to become responsible for their own movement. If we continually rescue people from every consequence, we may also rescue them from every opportunity to grow. We may accidentally carry what belongs to their journey. And in doing so, we may prevent the very lesson that could have set them free. There is compassion that comforts. It sits beside someone in grief. It reminds them they are not alone. It offers presence before answers. There is compassion that challenges. It speaks the truth when silence would become permission. It sets the boundary when continued access would become harm. It refuses to confuse love with enabling. Neither form of compassion is more loving than the other. Both become necessary at different moments. Wisdom learns which one the moment requires, because compassion is not measured by how much you give away. It is measured by whether your movement helps create more responsibility, more dignity, and more life for everyone involved. Every wound creates a decision, not immediately, not while the pain is still fresh, not while your heart is still trying to understand what happened, but eventually a question quietly arrives. Will this pain stop with me or continue through me? Someone embarrassed you. Do you embarrass the next person? Someone ignored you. Do you ignore someone else? Someone judged you. Do you become more judgmental? Someone withheld grace. Do you become less generous? Someone made you feel unseen. Do you stop seeing others? Notice how quietly the pattern moves. Not because you wanted to repeat it, because pain has a way of asking to be shared, not intentionally, almost automatically. It whispers, this is how people treat one another. And if we never question that voice, we begin passing our injury to people who never caused it. This is how pain moves through families, through workplaces, through friendships, through neighborhoods, through entire cultures. Not because people want suffering, because suffering often goes unexamined. One wounded person teaches another. One fearful generation raises the next. One silence becomes another silence. Until eventually, no one remembers where it began. They only know what feels normal. Every generation inherits something. Some inherit wisdom, some inherit courage, some inherit kindness, some inherit fear, some inherit silence, some inherit anger, some inherit the belief that love must always be earned. The inheritance isn't always material. Sometimes it is simply a way of moving through the world. Soft strength asks a different question. Not, what happened to me? But what am I passing forward? Not what entered my life. What moves through me because of it? When I speak, what am I passing forward? When I lead, what am I passing forward? When I love, what am I passing forward? When I hurt, what leaves me and enters someone else? You may not be responsible for where the wound began. You may not have chosen what happened. You may not have deserved what was done to you, but you are responsible for whether it continues unchallenged. That responsibility isn't meant to shame you. It isn't another burden to carry. It's meant to free you. Because the moment you become aware of the pattern, you also become capable of interrupting it. You can pause before repeating what was repeated to you. You can choose a different response, a different tone, a different boundary, a different future. Not because the past never happened, because the past no longer gets to decide your next movement. Maybe healing isn't only about feeling better. Maybe healing is deciding that someone else's pain doesn't get the final word in your life. Maybe healing is refusing to become the next link in the same chain, choosing that the hurt stops here, that fear stops here, that humiliation stops here, that distortion stops here, not perfectly, but intentionally, one movement at a time. And maybe that is where real freedom begins, not when the wound is forgotten, but when it no longer decides who you become. One of the hardest parts of living with integrity is that integrity doesn't always receive immediate rewards. It doesn't always look successful. It doesn't always feel effective. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you. Sometimes telling the truth makes life harder. Sometimes keeping your word goes unnoticed. Sometimes walking away looks like losing. Sometimes the boundary is misunderstood. Sometimes the kindness is never acknowledged. Sometimes the honest choice appears to leave you with less than if you had compromised. Our culture has quietly taught us to judge decisions by immediate outcomes. Did it work? Did you win? Did they change? Did you get recognized? Did it pay off? Those questions aren't meaningless, but they are incomplete, because character doesn't grow on the same timeline as results. Some things need time. Think about planting a tree. You don't dig it up every morning to see if it's growing. You don't measure its worth by whether it casts shade the first week. You water it. You protect it. You remain patient. You trust the process. Growth happens beneath the surface long before it becomes visible. Roots spread where no one can see them. Strength develops before height appears. The same is true for you. Every honest conversation, every healthy boundary, every quiet act of kindness, every moment you choose patience instead of pride, every decision to refuse bitterness, every time you tell the truth when deception would have been easier, every moment you choose integrity without applause. None of them may change the room immediately. The other person may not understand. The relationship may not improve. The workplace may remain difficult. The outcome may not reward you today. But every one of those movements changes the person making the decision. And that matters, because people often believe their actions shape the world. They do. But first, they shape the one acting. Every decision becomes practice. Every practice becomes habit. Every habit becomes character. And character becomes the quiet foundation beneath every future choice. Long before other people notice your integrity, your own mind has already learned what kind of person it is becoming. Your heart has learned what it will protect. Your body has practiced a different movement. That is why small decisions matter so much. They are never only about the moment. They are rehearsals for the life you are building. The world may not notice today. The room may never applaud. No one may thank you for choosing the harder path, but your future self is being built one decision at a time. One honest word, one steady boundary, one patient response, one refusal to become what disappointed you. Integrity does not always change the world overnight, but it quietly changes the person who continues to choose it. And sometimes, that is the beginning of every lasting change that follows. Take a moment, not to judge yourself, just to notice. Where has disappointment been trying to write your story? Where have you begun expecting less because expecting more once hurt? Where has caution quietly become distance? Where has wisdom slowly become cynicism? And where have you remained soft even when life gave you every reason not to? Those moments matter because every time you refuse to let pain become your identity, you are practicing a different future, not just for yourself, for every person your life touches. Maybe maturity was never about becoming impossible to disappoint. Maybe maturity is discovering that disappointment doesn't get to choose your direction. Maybe strength isn't found in building higher walls. Maybe it's found in building stronger roots. Roots that hold when the wind changes. Roots that remember who you are when circumstances try to rename you. People will still misunderstand you. Some promises will still be broken. Some relationships will still end. Some dreams will still change. That isn't failure. That is life. The question has never been whether life will challenge your character. It will. The question is, when life places pressure on your heart, what comes out? If bitterness comes out, there is healing still waiting. If fear comes out, there is trust still growing. If pride comes out, there is humility still calling. But if compassion still comes out, if honesty still comes out, if courage still comes out, not because life has been easy, but because you decided pain would not become your teacher forever, then something beautiful has happened. You have not become untouched. You have become transformed. And perhaps that has been the invitation all along. Not to escape the world, not to harden against it, but to move through it without becoming what wounded you. Thank you for spending this time with me. If today's conversation found you where you are, share it with someone who may need the reminder, not because they need another lecture, but because they may need to know that disappointment doesn't have to become identity. If you're enjoying Human Velocity X, subscribe, follow, and join us on Facebook. Not for noise, for the conversation that continues between episodes. Next week, we begin turning our attention outward, not to fix the world, not to convince people, but to explore something quieter, something most of us have felt long before we had words for it. Because whether you realize it or not, every room changes when you enter it, and next time, we're going to ask why. Until then, remember, every day is awesome. We just have to get through it.